Hey everyone, I hope you're well and that 2021 is treating you okay. Welcome to my first eclipse forecast for 2021, which is going to focus on the supermoon lunar eclipse that's happening in Sagittarius on the 26th of May. An interesting time, lots happening, lots to cover. So what I'm going to cover, just so you kind of have an idea, is I'm going to have a look at the Sabian symbol. I'm going to look at the chart. I'm also going to look at the fixed star aspects, and then I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to look at the human design. So this is going to look at the stargates in which this eclipse happens and how these fit into the energetic body, in the body graph of human design. Now, many of you probably don't know this, but I've been kind of studying human design since about 2011, when I first had a reading with a wonderful man named Hal Barr. And last year I really got a wonderful opportunity to really dig deeper, and I'm absolutely loving it because it's allowing me to combine my love of the I Ching with astrology in one system. So I really hope you enjoy this. Do let me know your feedback. So the first thing I need to say is that this particular eclipse will be a supermoon. Now, supermoons, as you probably know by now, are full moons that happen very close to the Earth. So it's when the moon is at perigee, which is basically the closest it gets in its orbit to the Earth. And so that's why it looks really, really large in the sky. And when we have the supermoon, it means that we can see the blood color that the moon goes as a result of the shadow of the Earth on the face of the moon. We can see it much more clearly. From an astrological point of view, it means that things can get amplified, perhaps a little bit more than usual. So in many ways, we have a kind of triple whammy here of it being a full moon, number one, which we all know is about endings, culmination points, and amplified emotions. Number two, we've got a supermoon, which is, a full moon plus plus. And then on top of that, it's an eclipse, which is also very big energy and often precipitates a paradigm shift or some kind of very important energetic shift. So you put these three things together and we could have a lot of big emotions around. So there is definitely the potential for a bit of drama, possibly a little bit of triggering, a little bit of hype. So just something to be aware of as we move into the shadow or the kind of orb of this particular event, which could last anywhere between 2 weeks to 3 months. So just something to bear in mind. And I should also remind everybody that in general, the way that I work with eclipses is that for me, solar eclipses begin a 6-month cycle. They happen at new moons, so they're really almost kind of turbocharged new moons, and then lunar eclipses always happen at a full moon, and so for me that closes out the previous 6-month cycle. But of course, we don't get the same amount of eclipses every year. They don't always occur in pairs, but this one does. This one is closing out the cycle we started in December of 2020, when we had that wonderful solar eclipse a week before the grand conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. So, this really kind of was quite a hyper amped up, optimistic, kind of cycle, and we're kind of closing that out, and I think everybody can feel that to an extent. There's a certain amount of particularly in the the cryptocurrency market, there's a certain feeling of things having kind of reached a certain crisis point, and now there needs to be a kind of cooling off period. And I think from a personal point of view, it's possible that some of you will be feeling that too. Right, so the first thing to say is that this particular eclipse happens in the 6th degree of Sagittarius. This is where the moon will be, and the Sabian symbol for this particular degree is a game of cricket. Now, you couldn't get a more English game if you tried, and I know there are a lot of euphemisms for this game, the game of gentlemen and so on, and then there is that really famous saying, it's not cricket, which the English like to refer to, and essentially what they're talking about is about fair play. So if something's not cricket, then it's not fair, and I think justice and fairness and integrity are going to be very important, going to be a key theme. And as we'll see when we look at things like the fixed star aspects, which tie in quite strongly with this, there's also a need, and there may be a need, you may be called upon to stand up for what you believe is fair and right and sort of just. These are going to be quite strong themes during this particular eclipse. So here we've got the chart for this total lunar eclipse, and as you can see, the moon and the sun, if I use my mouse here, we can see that the sun is sitting with the north node in Gemini, and across that, with the earth in the center, is of course the moon here in Sagittarius. So the moon in Sagittarius detrimented, it's not terribly happy in Sagittarius, so on the whole this can lead to overreactions, hyperbole, a little bit of drama. I think we saw that last year, I think it was in June when we had that lunar eclipse in Sagittarius, and it's sort of kind of coincided with a lot of civil unrest and a lot of kind of kicking off of righteous indignation on a lot of levels, and so we could see some themes returning from 2020, but equally this is slightly different, as this has a particularly different feel, it's in a different Sabine symbol, so a different degree, but also the sun and the moon here are making a T-square to Jupiter, which you can see here with this red triangle. So the sun and the moon in opposition, as they always are at a full moon, and then Jupiter in Pisces, sort of at the midpoint between the two. So what's interesting about this is that Jupiter has newly ingressed into Pisces, and this happened on the 13th of May. So it was within a few days of the Elon Musk tweet that sent Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin crashing down. So I discussed that in detail in my forecast that's on the Astro Insights blog, but on a sort of purely personal level, this particular T-square I think is really also emphasizing this need, the fact that you may be called upon to stand up for your principles, because of course Jupiter is always about beliefs, it's about your kind of spiritual practices, it's also about your ideals, your philosophy on life. And it's just newly ingressed into Pisces, which is all about spirituality, about a life after death, about the sort of bigger picture of how we fit into the sort of collective, that more kind of cosmic consciousness as opposed to sort of individual consciousness. And there's going to be a tension between these two things. I mean, we already have it in the T-square. On the one hand, we've got the sun, which is the planet associated most with kind of higher consciousness, and then we've got the moon, which is very much associated with the kind of embodied consciousness, our habits, our gut reactions, sometimes the way we get triggered, our kind of fight-flight responses, our survival instincts, that kind of thing. And to have Jupiter sitting in the middle, we can see that in a way, perhaps the sort of energy dynamic that we're talking about here is about trying to find a balance. When we stand up for our beliefs or defend our beliefs, we don't necessarily want to come from a kind of knee-jerk place, which I think is what we saw a lot last year. I think we saw a lot of people who were triggered, kind of acting out, maybe not thinking things through entirely, or who just felt very angry because they didn't feel as though they had a voice. So we need to sort of be careful that we don't just sort of vent our spleen on the one hand, which is what the moon detrimented in Sagittarius could do. It's fiery, so it can be about anger, about kind of venting, that sort of thing. And then on the other hand, not being too superficial, because the sun here is in Gemini, which is an air sign, and it is very logical and tends to skim over the surface of things, of this polarity. They both are associated with education, information, the way that we think, the way that we communicate, but Sagittarius tends to be a little bit deeper and have that broader perspective, whereas Gemini tends to be a little bit more localized and sometimes a bit gossipy, but often overly reliant on kind of facts or sort of logical information. And as we all know, facts can be arranged in any number of ways to mean any number of things. So I think that what we're being kind of asked to perhaps question here, or just pause and think about, is you know, what do we believe? Why do we believe it? How do we balance what we believe and our kind of intuition and our sense of conviction, our spiritual conviction on the one hand, with our logical mind, you know, which is sort of associated with the third eye, so that more kind of discerning, organizing mind, so the more left brain type of activity on the one hand, with the right brain, which is a little bit more like Sagittarius than the moon. So trying to find a balance between those two things when we decide how we want to stand up for our principles, or do something that's more in alignment with our principles. That's I think going to be one of the challenges at this time, and you know, over the next at least 2 weeks, but I would say probably months. You know, we're talking here sidereal months, so from one full moon to the next, or 3 months. And then the sun is also conjunct the North Node, and this particular point, you know, is very much associated with fate on the one hand, so it's about destiny, but it's also about collective consciousness. So this could manifest, as I said, in one of two ways. It could be about how we choose, you know, kind of thought leadership on the collective level. So perhaps there's certain people that are prominent in the collective consciousness, or in the media or social media, that a lot of people are listening to on the one hand, and then on the other hand, there's the moon with the south node, which is more about the sort of kind of feminine energy, but also about release, because the south node is very much associated with what we need to release, what we need to let go of, where we may get stuck in kind of comfortable patterns or habits. So, you know, this is kind of challenging us to come out of our comfort zone and just sort of imagine or have a paradigm shift when it comes to how we understand the way that we formulate beliefs, the way that we arrive at beliefs. So looking at our prejudices, looking at our blind spots when it comes to making assumptions, for example. Also looking at the information that we're presented with, you know, particularly in the public domain, whether it's by politicians, by the media, by social media, or whatever, prominent people, or books even, you know, Gemini and Sagittarius, it's any form of information really, and then thinking about how sometimes people can use information to manipulate us. So, you know, I think that's something we've learned from social media, is that very often we arrive at beliefs not necessarily based on logical assumptions or kind of a logical train of thought, but often based on emotions, and those emotions can sometimes be affected by unconscious beliefs that we've either arrived at through social conditioning, through early childhood patterning and imprinting, you know, through a parent, or through peers, you know, certainly during our teen years, that 7-year period between 14 and 21, we are very susceptible to peer pressure and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of ways and a lot of avenues where we can be influenced in terms of what we think and what we believe. So I think it's just asking us to be really quite to kind of take a step back before we sort of react to something, you know, kind of in a knee-jerk way, and really assess where possibly we have become a little bit you know, narrowly focused, or sort of narrow-minded, in the sense of you know, only always kind of defaulting to a particular perspective, when in fact, you know, this may not necessarily be relevant anymore, or there may be new information that we need to assess in relation to what we kind of had when we first arrived at that particular sort of conclusion or belief, and revisit things. So staying open, listening, I think, is going to be important, rather than reacting straight away. But equally, I think where we do feel that we've thought something through quite carefully, also being prepared to sort of stand up for what we believe in. So the final thing is that the moon will be making a trine to Chiron, which, as you can see, is actually also sextile to both the sun and the North Node, and then to Saturn, which has just gone retrograde in the sign of Aquarius. So this happens, I think, on the 23rd of May, so a couple of days before the eclipse. So this is fascinating for a number of reasons. First of all, it looks like an arrow, doesn't it? And of course, you know, Sagittarius, the sign of the moon, is the archer with his bow and arrow. He is the sort of the centaur with a bow and arrow. So that's very, very interesting. And of course, Chiron is the wound. He is also a centaur, but he's a wounded centaur. And the whole story of Chiron is, of course, about somebody who then goes on to become the wounded healer, and who also protects those people who feel like misfits or down and outs. In some way, people who don't feel as though they belong or have an abandonment wound. So the core thing being the core wound, really, in astrological terms, and turning this pain into power. So I do think that, as I say, that there is this huge opportunity for us collectively and as individuals to really look at I think we're going to be triggered possibly, and it's going to have something to do with our core wound, particularly around our masculine energy. So this is the side of us that's more assertive, that takes initiative, and that kind of likes to be in charge, and also is there to kind of defend us. I think it's that internal warrior that helps to sort of defend us. If you think about the Archangel Michael, that defends us when we feel under attack, or when we feel that we need to sort of defend our position. If we feel that somebody is being a little bit unfair in terms of their characterization of us, or judging us unfairly in some level. So really, really important stuff. I think if we think about this T-square here with Jupiter, I think there's a real opportunity through the Chiron trine to find new ways of kind of defending ourselves, and of speaking our truth, and of standing up for what we believe in a way that doesn't necessarily lead to self-sabotage, that doesn't create unnecessary hurt, with others, if we're sort of overly defensive or overly aggressive, for example, and also just allows us to find ways of kind of being in the world that don't necessarily lead to kind of self-destructive tendencies, hamper us in some way. So trying to find that middle ground of, being neutral when it comes to listening to other people's points of view, responding in a way that is constructive, staying grounded and centered, and learning not to be triggered or kind of overreact, which is, common with when you've got a kind of a T-square involving the sun and the moon. You've got to find that midpoint between your solar energy and your lunar energy, between the left and the right brain, between your instinct on one hand and your kind of your subconscious internalized default settings on one hand, and then your conscious mind on the other. So lots of really interesting themes, and as we'll see, they tie in very closely to other aspects of this eclipse. So here we've got the fixed star aspects, and these are fascinating. So first of all, we've got the moon in the Via Combusta. This is traditionally an area of the zodiac that lies between Scorpio and Libra. So we are talking here about the sidereal zodiac. When we look at the fixed stars, we're looking at the actual heavens, and of course this means that we use the grid of where things are currently, as opposed to the tropical zodiac, which is solar. It has to do with subdivisions of the wheel of life, the sun's path around the earth from the perspective of earth during the course of a year. So the moon in the Via Combusta, and the Via Combusta is an interesting part of the sky. It's a region of the sky that's very close to the galactic center of our Milky Way. And you can actually see in this image here is Sagittarius the archer, and he is aiming his arrow, his bow and arrow, directly at the galactic center, which is here. And what's interesting about this is that this has actually been shown by astronomers to be a black hole. It's a supermassive black hole with a mass equivalent of about 4 million suns. So this is actually the 0 point, or the nucleus of our galaxy. And it's so interesting because I only discovered this recently, and last year I talked a little bit about a vision that I had about 10 years ago, which kind of figured into the Sagittarius eclipses that we had last year. And I talked a little bit about the bow and the arrow and the target, and the target was like an eye, and if you look at many galaxies, you have this kind of black hole in the center. So it's so fascinating that we are kind of coming back to those themes. It was almost full circle here. So Sagittarius here is aiming his bow and arrow at the galactic center, and here is Scorpio, and you can see the moon, which will be in this constellation, the sidereal constellation, at the time of the lunar eclipse, because because of precession of equinoxes, the sidereal zodiac is one sign behind the tropical zodiac. So this is fascinating on a number of levels, because you can see that it's sitting here in the Via Combusta, which sits between about 15 degrees of Libra and 15 degrees of Scorpio, and the scales of justice here, Libra, is kind of meeting the claw of the scorpion. So it's very often embedded in the mythology that you have this idea of justice on the one hand and then retribution on the other. So there's the idea of kind of legal justice or karmic justice on one hand, meted out by karma on one hand, and then you have people wanting to take justice into their own hands and to sort of seek revenge or retribution, which is represented here by the scorpion. And what's fascinating is, as I say, that we are, first of all, we are revisiting themes that were quite strong kind of around about the time of the November elections. I talked about that new moon in Scorpio, and I think I talked about themes there around how Joe Biden is a Sagittarius, his son's Sagittarius, with very strong Scorpio in his chart. I think he's got Scorpio rising in about 4 or 5 planets, and then his deputy, Kamala Harris, is of course a Sun Libra, and these two were very, very prominent in the sky at the time of the Capitol Hill riots. So again, these themes sort of came up. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have further developments, with regards to that, during this period, a bit of a flare up possibly in terms of tensions between supporters of Trump, QAnon supporters on one hand, far right people, and then sort of Democrats on the other. So very, very interesting stuff. And what's even more fascinating is how this links back to the December eclipses, because of course it was in December when we began the 6-month cycle that this eclipse will be closing out, at that December, I think it was 14th solar eclipse in Sagittarius. And of course a few days after that, about a week after that, on the 21st of December, we had the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, the grand conjunction. So isn't it fascinating that they also figure into things here, because of course Jupiter's newly ingressed into Pisces, a mutable sign, which is why it's making a mutable square to the Sun and the Moon at this eclipse. And then Saturn has just gone retrograde in Aquarius. So fascinating stuff here. Now what's also interesting is that the Sun at the time in Gemini is going to be parallel to a fixed star called Capulus. Now this is known as the sword of the warrior, and it's part of the constellation of Perseus. So it's a star very much associated with the sword of the warrior or the knight. It's also associated with the Ace of Swords, so the sword of truth. And it's very strongly connected to themes around defending the truth, cutting through to the truth, getting clarity about things, piercing the veil, etc., etc. And this is going to be very important, I think, over this period, because there's going to be, I think, a lot of confusion developing around certain issues, and I think it's going to have a lot to do with information that's going to be kind of like announced in the public sphere by institutions, politicians, that kind of thing, that could lead to confusion. So I'm thinking in the UK, for example, around Boris Johnson and the current Tory government, and what policy they are eventually going to come up with regards to travel over the summer, in terms of COVID-19, because of course travel is something ruled by both Gemini and Sagittarius. And then of course in the United States we are having a lot of policy announcements from the White House, particularly around things like cryptocurrency, and that's a very big theme at the solar eclipse. So yes, I think it's going to be and also China is coming out with a lot of announcements as well, economic policy announcements around the banning of crypto mining. Everyone thinks that they're going to be announcing the official launch of the digital dai, their sort of their digital currency. So I think this potentially could be a period of quite a lot of shifts, changes, but also confusion, fear, doubt, uncertainty, etc., etc. And here what we are being kind of asked to focus on with Perseus, you can see Perseus, the hero here, is cutting off the Gorgon's head. So really not taking things at face value, of not allowing information in the public domain to scare us, so going and doing our research to verify if information is correct, talking to a number of sources before we make up our minds, and also where we find that there are people that are spreading a lot of what they call FUD, fear, uncertainty and doubt, just kind of cutting it off at the head. So just not sort of, once we have made up our mind and we have really considered all sides of the matter and we feel that we've reached a fair conclusion, just sort of cutting off that monster, the Gorgon, the monster with the snakes on its head, off. So not allowing ourselves to constantly be triggered or be put into a position of fear if we know otherwise, not listening to rumors, checking things that we see on social media to make sure that it's not fake news, that kind of thing. So very, very interesting stuff. So it's very much associated again with this kind of warrior energy, and we've seen this already with we'll see it even more as we sort of progress on, but it's that, again, that divine masculine energy where we'll be asked to use our kind of penetrating focus of the third eye of the left brain, to really get focused and single-minded about where we, how we go about discerning the truth about something, making a plan and then sticking to it, kind of carrying it out, not being distracted or put off by either our emotions, knee-jerk responses by other people, by distractions, that kind of thing. But equally, also using this energy to come up with coherent arguments if we need to sort of defend ourselves, and to sort of follow through with that. So getting information, assessing it, and then making a decision and following through, having the courage of our convictions. So what's also interesting about this is that it continues the theme of romantic pursuit from the Taurus new moon, but now it's kind of giving it a more chivalrous slant. So interesting, we got Jupiter in Pisces, which is a much more idealistic energy. So a lot here about the Grail legends, which is all about chivalry, and of course chivalry is all about honor and sacrifice, personal honor, keeping your promises, rescuing the damsel in distress. So this is our more feminine energy, you could say. So really, if our feminine energy is kind of under threat, or is in some way needing support, or then I think this is where our masculine energy is being called on, because we are now, so this is associating with the sun. So this is really about the conscious mind. It's about our more assertive selves, our more masculine energy, how we assert ourselves in the world. So it could be about standing in, as I said, in your truth, defending the truth from propaganda, standing up for yourself against smear campaigns or cover-ups, and just basically not standing for lies, deceit, or kind of people making snap judgments. So by now you're probably wondering, well, where does this particular supermoon eclipse fall in my chart? How is it likely to affect me as an individual? And so what I've done is I've created a cheat sheet here, and you can see, if you look a little bit closer, that we've got Gemini Sagittarius here in the middle, which is where the sun and the moon will be. So the moon will be in Sagittarius, the sun will be in Gemini. So we are talking about an axis here. So what you need to do is look for your rising sign, and then find it on the table. So say, for example, your rising sign is Leo, and then look at both Leo and Aquarius to see how this particular pair, the sun and moon pair, are likely to sort of play out in your life. So, for example, if you've got Leo rising, then it's very much likely that the sun is going to be playing out here in your 4th house, and the moon in Sagittarius is going to be sort of playing out in your 10th house. So this is kind of affecting your MCIC axis. That's how to really read it. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I think if you want to have a little look, just pause the video and kind of do your own sort of scrutinizing in your own time, and then proceed with the rest of the forecast. So now let's look next at the human design aspect of things, because, as you know, I'm very big into my I Ching, and human design is one of those systems that I have been interested in for quite some time now, about 10 years actually, since I had a reading back in 2011. And, I love the way that it combines astrology and the I Ching in one system. So this really, I think, gives us a sense of how this particular eclipse is likely to resonate within our body and within our energy field. So I'm going to have a look at that next, just as sort of some extra information you might be interested in. So the first thing to sort of consider is that the moon will be in what they call gate 34. So this is hexagram 34, line 5. So hexagram 34 traditionally in the I Ching is it's called great invigorating, and it's all about Wang Hai, who is known in Chinese mythology as the first herdsman. So he was considered to be a metal magician and a warrior who drove the herd. So he was a great leader, he was very strong, he embodied the sort of the warrior king, if you like, and he was considered to be the founding ancestor of the Shang dynasty, which was a very solar dynasty. So the Shang dynasty is famous for their turtle divinations. That's why I've got a cracked turtle here. It's one of the early turtle divinations, which is the sort of forerunner of the I Ching. So this is very much to do with yang masculine energy. So again, reaffirming this idea that we are dealing with divine masculine energy, that we are being asked to sort of move into our divine masculine energy. And in human design, it's called the gate of power. And here it's all about learning to assert power without either being afraid or hiding our power, or indeed being too aggressive or pushy. So it's finding that midpoint, that middle ground, which is what Chinese Taoism is so focused on. And of course we have this in the played out in the astrology through that T-square between with Jupiter in the middle. It's kind of at that midpoint between the sun and the moon, so in other words it will be almost in alignment with the earth. So fascinating stuff really, that it's being reiterated across the systems. So line 5 in particular is about accepting. So line 5 is usually the sort of the power, the lord of the hexagram. So it's a very important hexagram. It's where things kind of come to culmination and where you can finally influence a situation. So here it says, you've got nothing to prove in your easy use of power. So you've learned how to wield power. Coupled with the moon, it can be about being moody and how this can affect your consistent use of power and can result in you being hesitant or perhaps, acting out. So again, what I was saying about that T-square, that it really is about balancing the solar aspects of our nature, which is that masculine, slightly more conscious energy on the one hand, and then the lunar energy, which is more feminine and is more intuitive and instinctive. So finding the balance in how we make decisions, how also we respond to stimulus in the world, in the physical world, or on an energetic level, and then act in response. So it's not that knee-jerk reaction of being triggered. It's more kind of scanning the environment and then getting information from it, and then using that information in a way that's going to ensure our survival or the survival of our family, or simply have us move in a constructive direction. So here we can see how it works within the energetic body. So this is the body graph in human design, and hexagram 34 sits here in the sacral region. So this is considered to be the region of vital energy. So it's associated with the sacral chakra. This is life force energy, and this particular well, it's activating the channel 3420, which links the solar plexus to the throat, and the throat in human design is all about taking the initiative or taking action. So it's part of the integration circuitry, which is all about individual survival and personal empowerment. So as I say, again, this is confirming the idea that this is really about learning to sort of stand in your power, to stand, in place in terms of your conviction, stay centered when, say others judge you unfairly or decide that they want to go in a different direction and it doesn't really resonate with you. So having the courage to go against the herd if necessary, to do what you need to do in order to stay safe, and to keep on an even keel, and sort of on your path, basically. So on the other hand, it can also be on a very primitive level about hypervigilance. And so on an energetic level, I think it's very important to just be aware of fight or flight responses that are possibly triggered by either other people or events in the world or your environment. But equally, this can be about the need to stay busy and to just kind of do all the time. And in this sense, the advice that's been given is to be careful not to waste your energy, whether this is on people that are constantly creating drama, whether this is a job that is a bit of a dead-end job where you feel as though you give a lot but you don't get a lot in compensation, or whether it's simply getting involved in projects where you are not recognized or acknowledged, or the energy exchange is not equal, shall we say, it's not balanced. So that's it. I hope you've got some use out of this and that you found it enjoyable. If you would like full access to my solar eclipse forecast for the next 6 months, then do sign up to my newsletter, which you can do at astrologysphere.com/subscribe. You may also be interested in a forecast that I've done for the Astro Insights blog, which is all about the medium-term outlook for the markets for the second half of 2021. And here I look specifically at the eclipses in relation to cryptocurrency, Bitcoin in particular, and then I also look at the Gann cycles with relation to the stock market and sort of the equities. So if that's something that you're interested in, then do check out my Astro Insights blog and watch the video that I've posted up there.